Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Saudi Arabia. The king is dead, the king is dead, long live the king. Recently, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia died at age 90. Ill for some time, he succumbed to lung infection. The successor to King Abdullah, the former crown prince and half-brother, is named King Salman. According to official kingdom websites, Salman is 79 years old. Such is the way of Saudi Arabia and the monarchy. That transition does not often follow primogeniture. That is, the lines from father to son. While his half-brother, the king, was still alive, lying ill in the hospital, Salman began to pave the way for his imminent rise to power. He prepared the kingdom for the inevitable moment of his brother's death. In January, assuming the mantle of leadership as King Abdullah became too ill to carry out his official duty, then Crown Prince Salman addressed the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and delivered the annual State of the Kingdom address. He spoke respectfully and chose his words carefully, and yet it was clear from his content as well as his presence at the podium that the king, Abdullah, would never address this kingdom again. And now, in the interest of stability, the new king, Salman, has named his own future successor. The successor to the successor is 69-year-old Crown Prince Morkin. While the monarchs, when they attain the mantle of kingship in Saudi Arabia, are quite old respectfully, the monarchy in Saudi Arabia is relatively new. Arabia was and is a society based on tribes, not nations. Ibn Saud established the monarchy in 1932, when Abdullah was just yet a young boy, as the final act of Ibn Saud's conquest over the four major areas of his ancestral home. Ibn Saud called his kingdom Mamlak al-Arabiya, al-Saudiya, which means the Arab Kingdom of Saud. In other words, it's not Saudi Arabia. It is Arabia, and Arabia is not the name of a place. It's an adjective which belongs totally to the family of Saud. Abdullah was the king who broke the mold. He was known as the reformer, but that's too simple and far too prosaic a description for this multidimensional monarch. His reign was complicated. On the one hand, King Abdullah was a staunch conservative who toed the line of Islamic values, which included strict adherence to Sharia law. Beheadings, stonings, the hacking off of hands were common in his kingdom. At times, the executioners of Saudi Arabia were so overwhelmed and overworked that they publicly complained of not having enough blood and new blood entering their field of employment. Executioners under Abdullah had so much work that they were often late coming home, that they had difficulty taking vacation time or even retiring. Abdullah was considered a friend of the West, a colleague of Western leaders, an anomaly in the Arab Middle East. The Islamic tone, though, was set by the Wahhabis, a very strict and extremist sect within Sunni Islam, who had been the partners of Saud in the creating of the kingdom. And after inheriting the monarchy, Abdullah continued to permit Wahhabi leadership to determine the Islamic way of life for his people. And yet, it was King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia who was at the forefront, the leading voice in the Arab world to fight against ISIS and Iran. And it was he who permitted Saudi women to drive behind the wheel of their cars, and who, in 2015, created an edict allowing women not only the ability to vote, but to run in the local election. That will happen in 2015. He even permitted women to roam outside their home without a male escort. Abdullah's attitude towards the West was as complicated as his approach to ruling over his country. King Abdullah convinced OPEC not to cut oil production, even as Iran was pressing hard to limit oil production to drive up the prices of oil. Saudi Arabia dealt a huge economic blow to Iran and handed a great victory to the West in the way in which it handled itself vis-a-vis OPEC. His attitude towards Israel was even more complicated. During this last summer's conflict with Gaza, the Saudis, together with Egypt, were kept up to date with a blow-by-blow update that came to them directly from the Israeli Prime Minister's office. It first went to Egypt and from Egypt to Saudi Arabia. That relationship explains why it was so natural for Israel's president, Reuven Rivlin, to praise King Abdullah when he heard the news of the death. He said, "I was saddened to hear of the passing of King Abdullah. He was an example of a grounded, considered, and responsible leadership. With the deep religious tradition, as guardian of the holy places of Islam, King Abdullah acted as a moderator, respecting the sensitivity and sanctity of Jerusalem, and sought to promote a vision of prosperity for the region. His policies contributed greatly to our region and to the stability of the Middle East." Former President and former Prime Minister Shimon Peres of Israel, speaking from the World Economic Forum in Davos, where he heard the news of King Abdullah's death, said, "This is a loss for the Middle East, a loss for peace in the Middle East." One has to realize that from the very moment that Abdullah's death was officially announced, leaders around the globe have sung the praises of King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. But that the Israelis should be so laudatory speaks volumes as to the type of presence Abdullah was and the long shadow his death will cast upon the world. We need to know and to care about the transition of power in Saudi Arabia for several reasons. Of course, oil is a primary reason. But more than oil, Saudi Arabia plays an essential regional role. Saudi Arabia plays a role of big brother who sets the tone throughout the entire region. They check Iran. They helped oust Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. The king, along with Sisi of Egypt, urged Israel to squash Hamas. Of course, most of these ideas and the deals that were brokered were from behind closed doors. But Abdullah made it all happen. It was he who proposed the peace plan for the region, a plan that was not simply about peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, but a regional plan. King Abdullah realized that Israel craved more than anything else normalization. So his plan was that after Israel and the Palestinians signed an agreement to peace, the other countries in the region, including, of course, Saudi Arabia, would normalize their relations with Israel. Abdullah was deeply insulted by President Obama's entreaties to Iran, and he would not be assuaged. As the fourth largest buyer of all military weapons in the world, Abdullah showed his anger by, on more than one occasion, letting the United States representatives sit in his antechamber, waiting and cooling their heels, and not even granting them an audience. And then he reached out and began to buy weapons and parts from China instead of from the United States. Abdullah understood his enemies, and he knew how to choose his friends. In Judaism, there's a blessing one says upon meeting a monarch. There are two variations of the blessing. One is for the king or queen who functions as a figurehead within the country, like England or Norway. The other is what you say when you meet a king or queen who has the power of life and death over you. That blessing invokes the name of God. That is the kind of monarchy that they have in Saudi Arabia. Everything belongs to the king. And this king will be missed. Abdullah is dead. Salman is monarch. A new era has begun. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is a column from the New York Times, published on Thursday, January 22nd, 2015. The column is by Jane Huckabee and is entitled, "When Women Become Terrorists." Jane Huckabee teaches at Duke University, at the law school there, and she's the director of the International Human Rights Clinic. She's the co-editor of a book called Gender, National Security, and Counterterrorism. This essay raises some very important points and helped me better formulate and understand women and ISIS. Huckabee does an excellent job explaining why women are involved, why they are recruited, what roles they assume, and what big mistakes we often make concerning women and ISIS. The most important point is that if we do not understand how women are used in ISIS, we will not be able to adequately stymie their recruitment or confront them and defeat them. In order to do it, we need to understand this. Huckabee begins. Since the terror attacks in Paris 2 weeks ago, the French police have been on the hunt for Hayat Boumediene, the partner of Ahmedi Koulibaly, one of the slain gunmen. She is now suspected to be in Syria. Some news reports speculate that Ms. Boumediene, 26, may have been the more radical of the two. Huckabee then lays out the essential question, that over the next few weeks, people are going to need to ask, what is the role of women in ISIS? She writes, while the group opposes any women, many women also flock to its ranks. Roughly 10% of its Western recruits are female, often lured by their peers through social media and instant messaging. The percentage is much higher in France. An estimated 63 out of 350 French nationals believed to be with the group are women, or just under 20%. Wow, that figure is earth-shattering. 20% of ISIS recruits from France are women? That means 1 in every 5. Huckabee explains that this is a very new, yet very old phenomenon. She invokes Chechen Black Widow suicide bombers. Although true, and it's also true that Palestinians have utilized women and even dressed men as women, the general rule in terror is pretty clear. Women tend not to be suicide bombers. But Huckabee explains there are many other essential roles to play in ISIS, not just the sex slave, which is what we think about most of the time when we talk about these issues. There are all-female brigades that enforce modesty codes. They patrol the streets looking for immodestly dressed women, and they exact violent punishment on them. They staff checkpoints. They go on home raids to assist with women. Huckabee is correct and continues describing that, quote, they are recruiters, trainers of female suicide bombers, wives and homemakers, fundraisers, and propagandists. They also sanitize the group's image by posting photos of themselves drinking milkshakes on Instagram and writing chatty tweets. Obviously, she suggests that it would be easier if we only saw these women as being sold into slavery. But here is where Huckabee is so on spot. Women join ISIS for the same reasons men do. They seek, quote, adventure, inequality, alienation, and the pull of a cause. Huckabee concludes, terrorists are strategic about using women. In increasingly chilling ways, to fight them, we have to move past simplistic assumptions about their gender, about terror, and get serious about helping women and girls who are on this deadly path, as well as their would-be victims. Huckabee presents a very impressive case. There is no reason to argue where she may go wrong. Her overall point should be taken very, very well. We simplistically think about women and terror. We almost never see the role they play outside of the sex slave. When we break it all down, there is no doubt that the most important role that they play is recruiter and inspirer. We really need to understand that better. In the spy world, this recruitment role is called a honeypot, and the honeypot is very difficult to combat. Second up is a column also from the New York Times. It was published a mere 2 days later, on January 24th, 2015. This column is by Martin London and is entitled, Why Tolerate Terrorist Publications? London is of counsel to the law firm Paul, Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison. He is a First Amendment litigator, and the firm, by the way, is normally just referred to as Paul Weiss. The main thesis London presents is extremely important. He explains and shows that there are limits to free speech. He also argues that permitting al-Qaeda to publish their magazine called Inspire on the web in the United States is not covered by the freedom of speech clause in the First Amendment. Even though it is on the internet, It should and can be barred from the U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder should do just that. Here is how London begins. While most of us would agree that religious fundamentalists, foreign and domestic, sometimes do serious harm to our society, there are other kinds of fundamentalists who are also dangerous. I refer to legal fundamentalists. Here London brings down a slew of those who fight for the First Amendment and have morphed the First Amendment out of proportion. He says that these people have, quote, persuaded our Attorney General that the amendment bars him from taking action against Inspire magazine, published by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. For those who do not know, this Al-Qaeda magazine is very slick and very convincing. It is a huge recruitment tool, but also is filled with recipes of how to commit terror attacks. The Tsarnaev brothers, who planted the bomb at the finish line of the Boston Marathon in 2013, that murdered 3 and injured 264, used Inspire magazine, that website, to build their bomb exactly to the specs outlined there. London argues that there is a limit to freedom of speech, and he proves it. He clearly shows that, let's say, for instance, while at war, one may not announce where the troops are or where they may land. He explains, quote, we have adopted many laws abridging free speech, such as in the cases of child porn, perjury, false representation, libel, slander, criminal conspiracy, etc. He admits that there is a balancing act, but sides with imposing limits. There's no doubt about that. He refers to Robert W. Warren, the district court chief judge, who said the following, quote, who when referring to Patrick Henry's famous liberty or death choice, explained in the short run, one cannot enjoy freedom of speech, freedom to worship, freedom of the press unless one first enjoys the freedom to live. In the end, London makes a very compelling argument to stop Inspire magazine from being available in the United States. But I fear that his argument will fail. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. The first cartoon is by Tom Towles. Towles won the Pulitzer in 1990. He is very funny. His cartoons tend to include a small image in the margin at the bottom. It's normally a caricature of himself making a comment about his cartoon commentary. I'll show you in a few minutes. He's syndicated through United Press Syndicate, known today as Universal U-Click, and is most often seen in the Washington Post. This cartoon was published first in the Washington Post on January 27th, 2015. The cartoon has Uncle Sam, a character, standing and talking to just any Joe Schmo. They look to be standing in front of a desert. A huge sign reads, "Caution, Mideast quicksand." Uncle Sam, the character, then says to his companion, quote, "This is where boots on the ground gets problematic." At the bottom of the page is Towles sitting at his drawing table, and he says, "It's that sinking feeling." I just love Towles' commentary on the commentary, even if it is him talking to himself. Towles expresses the worry of every politician, every leader, every analyst, every reader who focuses on the Middle East. There is a real fear that if you get too involved, it might suck you down, and that there is no way out. That, of course, includes putting boots on the ground to fight ISIS in Iraq and Syria. The next few cartoons we will talk about concern Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his invitation to speak to a joint session of the United States House and Senate. This first one is by Matt Worker. It was published on Politico website and syndicated through Universal U-Click online. Worker was a finalist for the Pulitzer in 2009, 2010, and won it in 2012. He is a founding staff member at Politico and is their featured cartoonist. Worker's work actually shows some serious art elements in it. This scene is Washington, D.C. The president's helicopter is flying, and you see the Washington Monument, the White House, and the Capitol. The Capitol has a new expansion on it. It says, "Now open, BBville." and it's flying the Israeli flag. Another large sign reads, quote, "All new settlements," unquote. And out front is a cement truck with AIPAC written on it. The conversation inside the helicopter, presumably the president is speaking, says, quote, "Of course Bibi's brushing us off. He won't even listen to us about building new settlements," unquote. An aide interrupts, calling the president's attention to what's happening down below on the ground in the Capitol building. Mr. President," he says, this is a very powerful cartoon and very funny. The point is clear. Bibi and Israel have a very good relationship with Congress. So good, he feels at home there. The next cartoon is by Jeff Danziger. It was published on January 24th, 2015. Danziger is the classic cartoonist. He lampoons everyone, right and left. Whenever he sees a silly point, something he can make fun of, he does. Like me, he's an equal opportunity critic. This one is part of the MYTS CWS. Those letters actually mean something. They mean the New York Times Service, Cartoons Writers Service. As an aside, the New York Times makes a significant amount of money through these syndicates. The title of the cartoon is Mr. Boehner Now Running Foreign Policy. Boehner and Bibi are in a tank. On the tank is written the words, U.S. Mideast Policy. Out of the turret on top, Boehner is pouring wine into a glass, and he's asking Bibi, "Another drink, Bibi? My old pal, come on, we're celebrating." Bibi answers while sitting down up front in the driver's seat. "I better not, I'm driving." These cartoons are damning critiques of Boehner inviting Netanyahu to D.C. to speak to a joint session of Congress, where both House and Senate will sit. Netanyahu's speech will look similar to President Obama's State of the Union. Last time Bibi spoke to the Joint House, he was interrupted so many times that he even received 29 standing ovations. I think I calculated that last time an additional 26 minutes was added to the speech because of all the applause. There is little doubt that much tension will emerge between the White House and Jerusalem and between the White House and Capitol Hill because of the Bibi speech. But inside the hall, both parties will be mesmerized, and both sides of the aisle will be united in their love of Israel and the need to protect her and the United States and the world from Iran. After all, we know that according to the Constitution, the president is responsible for foreign policy. But Congress has its role too. And that is part of the huge tension that has been present in D.C. since Obama was elected president. And now that the president is facing a House and a Senate that is not friendly, it'll be even worse. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. I want to think out loud with you now. We have known some of the details since the battle with Gaza ended, but now we know much more. More details, more specifics, that further our understanding, not conjecture and not hypothesis. Since the end of the 50-day conflict, Hamas has been reconstructing, recreating, digging new tunnels. Tunnels into Egypt, tunnels into Israel, tunnels into Gaza, tunnels and tunnels and tunnels and more tunnels. And with these new tunnels come newer, more sophisticated technology. According to Israeli intelligence, Hamas learned from their experience in fighting Israel, and they are applying these new lessons in their new tunnels. And Israel has begun to counter. The IDF engineering corps that focuses on these tunnels is called Yahalom, or Diamond. Yahalom is adding hundreds of personnel to their unit. Not only is Israel significantly increasing the size of the specialized unit, they are upgrading the status of its commander. The commander, once a lieutenant colonel, is now a full-bird colonel. Israel must anticipate the technology and the advancements of Hamas. And they must develop new strategies, practical devices that can defeat them. This expanded engineering corps is essential. I also want to think out loud with you about lone wolves in Israel, where there was another lone wolf attack in Israel recently. The perpetrator was a young Arab man from Tulkarem. He boarded a bus in Tel Aviv and started stabbing, attacking 13 people. He ran and was shot in the leg by police as he attempted to escape. He was arrested. The terrorist explained that he perpetrated the terror attack because of Israeli actions in Gaza over the summer. He said that he was excited by the internet videos he saw and by the internet discussions about seeking revenge. There are certain givens about lone wolf attackers against Israelis. The lone wolf in Israel is almost always a young Arab man in his 20s or 30s, angry over a family member who has been wounded or killed or interrogated by Israel. The attack is often an initiation rite or an attempt to prove something. The attacker is also always illegally in Israel. Lone wolves attack public transport because that is where Israelis are stationary, waiting for a bus or a train, sitting and traveling. The public transport system makes Israelis easy targets for the lone wolf. At this stage, it's pretty clear who the lone wolf is. Now Israel needs to put a stop to the terror. It will take intelligence and a strong security presence. Israel needs to advance its intelligence on people who are illegally infiltrate the country. They need to stop them and watch them. It is not an easy task, but Israel needs to clamp down on these lone wolves, and they need to do it soon. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Actually, today, it'll be a piquante piece of humor. In my world, I must either laugh or cry. Sometimes I have to do both, but I search for humor. This is a joke about terror and Israelis being victims of terror. An Israeli, an American, and a Frenchman are kidnapped by terrorists. And as they're kidnapped, the kidnappers say, I'm going to kill you all at the same time, but you each get a final request. The American says, you know, I would really love to have a hot dog and hamburger before you kill me. The Frenchman says, I'd really love a crepe before you kill me. And the Israeli says, hit me in the face. Hit me in the face, the terrorist says, why should I hit you in the face? He says, hit me in the face. No, I won't. I'm going to kill you. Why should I hit you in the face? Finally, the terrorist hits him in the face. The Israeli pulls out an Uzi and kills all the terrorists. The American and the Frenchman says, if you had an Uzi the whole time, why didn't you kill him in the first place? And the Israeli says, why? And be condemned by the world for acting without provocation? Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.